what socialists identify as capitalism, I think they are identifying corporatism and crony capitalism. I don't think
Which is what we actually live under.
Correct. That's right. And I would have many of those same criticisms, and I would take very little issue with criticisms of, elites entrenching cartel behaviour and monopolies, all that sort of thing. I think that the state as it has existed for most of what we would know as the state has had those problems and has had those flaws. And I certainly don't think, if you look at somewhere like America, like all of their corn subsidies, like all this bizarre stuff. Like people, I think really America is a corporatist military industrial state masquerading in the skin suit of a capitalist state.
Yes.
Like there's very little about how America actually works under the hood that is what the founders of America would recognise as a free state, as a free market state. And perhaps that's as much human nature as it is when the socialists get in charge and everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Like perhaps it's naive to think that you can organise in a way that avoids that within capitalism, as much as to say socialism can avoid the sort of inevitable, some people more equal than others, all that kind of thing.